Welcome to Real Estate 360, an informative and engaging hour discussing everything you need to know about the world of real estate. Your host, Tom K. Wilson, will provide you with insight and guidance on how to buy, sell, finance, and invest in real estate. He also offers real estate tax management strategies, new construction advice, home improvement tips, and much, much more. Now, here's your host for Real Estate 360, Tom K. Wilson.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Real Estate 360 program, your number one source for all of your real estate needs here in the Bay Area, where we provide you with the information that you need to make the best fact-based decisions. Nice to have you with us. Today we're going to cover, going to be your show, going to cover frequently asked questions that I get all the time from relatively new investors or ones that want to expand. And I will go through ones that have frequently been asked, and we welcome your call-in and your questions as well. If you're a new investor or expanding your investments or renewing your investing or want to do something different like start going out of state, we welcome your call-in to 800-516-1220. Real Estate 360 is on 5 days a week at 3 o'clock on AM 1220. We have Laurie Graymont on Thursdays, and we have Joe Kuchera on Monday, Tuesday, and Fridays, and I'm your host, Tom Wilson, on Wednesdays, and glad to be here. And at the end of the program, we'll give you Tom's top tip for the day. And again, if you have questions today about your investing, whether it's a flip or for long-term hold, welcome your call to 800-516-1220. I'm going to start off with a question that is asked quite often that bothers people. And the question is, since the house prices are so cheap, why don't renters there buy a home instead of renting? Why don't they buy a home instead of renting? And that really troubles folks. Like their thought is, why is there something wrong? Should I not buy this because if it were so good, why wouldn't the renter buy it? Well, that's used to trouble me too. But what I've learned is that, first of all, even before the crash, and especially now, you have a lot of folks who were burned and are nervous about the idea of getting a house, even though things seem to be going up in most cities reasonably well. And two, many now don't qualify for a home because, unfortunately, they lost their home and they can't get a new loan for a while. And third, there are a lot of folks across America who could technically financially qualify, but they haven't saved the money, their money, so they can have a down payment. They maybe have not been as responsible as they could have been, and they're paying off their credit cards, and their scores hurt, and so forth. So there are various reasons, and there are a lot of folks who will probably always rent, and I think we have a higher percentage of those now than we did before the crash. So I've been told by my peers, and I'm a believer now, don't worry about it, just take the money. So it's not a good, strong explanation. It doesn't make sense from a number standpoint, but that's the way it is, so take advantage of it. Another question I get, and I should say that, I'm an experienced investor of 37 years, bought and sold over 2,000 units, and have certainly accumulated some good experience, which is partly why I do this show, so I can share some of that with you, and hopefully we can help you with your investments. But I am not an attorney, and I'm not a CPA, so any information that I give you is just from my perspective and what I do personally, but not necessarily advice that you shouldn't seek a professional to get for your situation. So with that, you're wondering, I'm sure, what the next question is, and that is, should I hold the title to my properties in an LLC? And my answer is, I don't hold any of my long-term holds in LLCs or any other entity other than my family trust. I have several peer investors that I know who do the same thing, and I will say that for partnerships with people outside of my business, or outside of my home, for large projects, multifam or commercial, or projects which require syndications are that the commercial lender requires an entity. I do indeed, and I've formed many entities, LPs, LLCs, corporation. But for the houses, I do not. So why is that? Well, here's my philosophy. Here's my thought. If you've got a house and its income is, say, $250 a month, and you've pulling in maybe a little over $3,000 a year, that sounds good. But if you have an entity just for that house, that takes off $800 right there alone, plus your accounting cost and your filing costs and so forth. It eats into that profit a fair amount. And in order for that entity to do you any good, you've got to have a problem. You've got to have a problem you can't solve. You've got to have a problem that that you get sued for. You have to lose that lawsuit, and it has to be something that insurance doesn't cover. So you have to make it through all 5 of those gates before that entity has a potential for doing you any good. And it's certainly in many states like California, it's also of limited value if it's just for yourself personally or yourself and your spouse. I do recommend, though, carrying liability insurance. Again, if you have questions as we're going along, please call in to 1-800-516-1220. I frequently get someone saying, I'm looking at a property that the agent says only needs paint and carpet, so I'm thinking for about $3,500, I'll be cash flowing. What do you think? Well, what I think is you probably haven't done one before, because my experience is that to do a decent rehab, it usually takes a lot more than that, and you have a lot of additional cost. The debt service, the insurance, the taxes, the utilities, advertising fees, lease-up fees, surprise rehab that you need to do, property management fees. All of those often add up to several times more than what the novice investor thinks up front it will take. And it's not uncommon by the time you buy a raw property till the time you have that first rent check in the bank, and that's the only thing that counts, right? When that first rent check is in the bank, then you can say, I'm cash flowing and I'm done with my expenses, but not until then. So it's often, it's not uncommon for, say, a $100,000 house for someone to have a total expense of $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 out of pocket before they actually have cash flow going. So be very careful in looking at a raw property that someone says you should be putting a rent check in the bank here very quickly for just a little paint. Usually does not happen. Let's talk about how you measure financial success with a rental property. The terms net operating income, cap rate, cash-on-cash return, internal rate of return. You've probably heard some of those, maybe not all of those terms. Let's talk about them so you can understand what the difference is from one to another. So the first one would be, let's say, cap rate. So cap rate is what percent return you get in the first year if you paid cash for the property with no debt. So if it's a $100,000 property, you pay it all cash, you get $10,000 back in that first year, you have a cap of 10. If you got back only $5,000 that first year, you have a cap of 5. So it's that simple. However, most people have debt on properties for leverage, which I do recommend, although don't get it too high. But the cap rate is a number that allows you to compare one property to another without regard to what the debt service is. Similarly, net operating income is like that as well. So it's it's all of the income minus all the expenses without debt service. So if you had $100,000 coming in and $50,000 going out, you'd have a net operating income of $50,000, but you might have a debt service on there that chewed up $40,000 of that and leaving you with only 10. But net operating income is income minus expenses, including everything except debt service or your mortgage payment. cash-on-cash return. Cash-on-cash means if you put out $20,000 for a down payment on a $100,000 house and you get $10,000 back in that year, then you've got a cash-on-cash return that's pretty good, right? That's 50%. So if you have you put out $20,000 and you get $2,000 back on that investment, which is more likely and more typical, that would be $2,000 on $20,000, or 10% cash-on-cash return. And that's how most folks measure that for single-family homes. Internal rate of return, what is that? Well, that's really the only true and fair way to compare two investments, regardless of whether it's a ice cream stand, or it's a stock investment, or it's a business, or it's real estate. So internal rate of return gives you the average annual rate of return over a period of time. Often 5 years is used for many kinds of businesses and as a sort of default. And it takes into account all the money that goes in and comes out of that investment, both capital and cash flow and the cost of sale and so forth over that period of time, including all the costs associated with buying and all the costs associated with selling. And it also takes into account the net present value of the money, because money you put in today is more valuable than money you put in the week before you sell the property. So just to give you a feel for what these numbers are like, we've got a fairly typical cash-on-cash return for a single-family home with 20-25% down is often somewhere in the 7 to 11% range. But the internal rate of return can be around 20%. So that, of course, is taken into account the fact that you have appreciation if you're in a good market and up market, along with your cash flow that comes in and out. So again, those terms are cap rate and net operating income, cash-on-cash return, and internal rate of return. Those are all pretty important because those numbers get thrown around a lot out there, and often people aren't real sure what that means or how they should address it. So those are important terms to understand the distinction between. So when we come back, we're going to talk about how multifamily properties compare to single family, and we're going to talk about many other subjects that people most often ask about real estate investing. So come stay with us and be back on AM 1220 KDOW.
For more information on today's program, visit RE360Radio.com. That's RE360Radio.com. AM 1220 KDOW traffic.
We're brought to you by Garmin. South 85, some Mountain View problems. A motorcycle and a couple of cars involved in this crash. Southbound at Fremont Avenue, it's got the right lane blocked, and traffic is backed up all the way to 237. It has metered the traffic flow south of that point. It looks good through the 280 interchange and down into Cupertino. No delays of note for southbound 280 between Los Altos and San Jose. South 101 typically slow. Lawrence Expressway towards Oakland Road. And South 880 dipping below the limit. Sluggish at the Montague Expressway down to 101. North 101 looks pretty good up out of Mountain View all the way towards Redwood City. Hate traffic? Don't be a hater. Get a Garmin Nuvi with subscription-free HD digital traffic and avoid it with updates as often as every 30 seconds. Drive with Garmin, the most trusted name in GPS.
You're a smart investor, steady and consistent. That's how you roll. Sure, you've thought about the rewards of real estate investing, but California is a bit too pricey to give the best returns. Well, what if I told you about a turnkey real estate investment opportunity where all the hard work of locating, buying, renovating is done for you? Wilson Investment Properties has a list of highly selected, fully renovated, and occupied by screened, high-quality tenants. Wilson Investment Properties' goal is to offer you the highest quality, highest cash flow, turnkey investment properties in the most stable, fastest-growing rental markets in the nation. Tom Wilson and his team has experience with over $100 million in investment real estate, 1,800 units, and over 300 single-family investment homes. Discover how you can succeed in real estate investing. Secure your free 18-page report by calling Wilson Investment Properties, 408-867-1867, 408-867-1867, or log on to TomWilsonProperties.com.
Plan now to attend the Sports, Health, and Wellness Expo coming up Saturday, January 26th at the Santa Clara Convention Center. Meet with sports, health, and wellness exhibitors such as rock climbing centers, yoga, weight management, and cross-training centers. There will be many valuable and exciting presentations throughout the day. Bring the entire family. This event takes place from 10:30 till 4 p.m. This will be a very in-depth expo, especially if you're interested in sports, health, and wellness. Also, meet with other exhibitors on site, such as the Stanford Eye Laser Center, Beck's Shoes, San Jose Earthquakes, and Bright Now Dental. It's a great lineup of presentations, so get your tickets now. Go to sportswellnessexpo.com. That's sportswellnessexpo.com. Be there Saturday, January 26th at the Santa Clara Convention Center for the Sports, Health, and Wellness Expo. Remember, free parking. Good automotive maintenance is important for the lifelong enjoyment of your car. That's why AM 1220 KDOW is proud to bring you Under the Hood with your host, Bill Adams, heard each Saturday morning at 8 a.m. Bill Adams is owner of Adams Automotive in Castro Valley, one of the premier automotive repair locations in the Bay Area. Tune in to Under the Hood Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. right here on AM 1220 KDOW.
It's another Black Wednesday. Join us for Off the Cuff with Rob Black and Friends, a no-host casual networking mixer where you can mingle with top professionals in the world of money and business. Some of Rob's friends include respected pros in the fields of real estate, investing, money managers, entrepreneurs, techies, and more.
Black Wednesday at Bistro at the Park inside the Lafayette Park Hotel and Spa, 3287 Mount Diablo Boulevard in Lafayette. We'll see you Wednesday, February 6th at 5 p.m.
Black Wednesday, Off the Cuff with Rob Black and Friends from AM 1220 KDOW. For more information on today's program, visit RE360Radio.com. That's RE360Radio.com. Now, here's your host for Real Estate 360, Tom K. Wilson.
Welcome back to the Wall Street Business Network. Nice to have you with us today, where we're discussing some of the most frequently asked questions by investors, both new and experienced. And I'm glad to cover them. And if you have a question of your own, feel free to call in at 1-800-516-1220. Often get folks saying that they want to start off in real estate, they got a good credit score, they have a lot of have a fair amount of capital, and they'd like to go buy an apartment house. And I ask them if they've ever owned any of the real estate, and they say no. And I have to tell them that, first of all, if they don't currently own real estate or any, should say apartment house, that the chances of them getting a loan for an apartment house in this tight money market is very, very small. If they have private money, okay, but often the numbers don't work. If they've got a close relationship with a regional bank, maybe they will if it's in that area, but the terms are not usually so good. To be able to get a best loan, it would usually be a Wall Street money or Fannie or backed commercial loan, and they won't even talk to you unless you already have experience or hold properties in that arena. But, of course, you can always go out and look for an equity partner. So that's a possibility. But also I'd say that if you don't have experience in that arena, it's pretty risky. There's a lot more moving elements to an apartment house than there are a house. It may not look like it on the surface, but one thing I tell folks is once they've accumulated some real estate, then adding an apartment house is a potentially good idea. But they need to recognize that for taking on potentially a little bit more cash-on-cash return, like we just talked about, for that property, you're taking on more risk as well. So you got to be very careful. And I prefer having multifams, as they're called, multifamily properties, that are large enough and have enough total income that they can afford a full-time on-site manager and full-time on-site maintenance. That's where you get your economy of scale. That's where you get your control of your tenants and property. If you have a small apartment house, then often the manager may not be there every week, and they can show up and find that there's someone that was selling drugs in one of the units, and the folks around them decide to move out, and all of a sudden, out of 16 units, you've got 6 empties. I've heard that sort of thing happening many times. So, and you've got landscaping and usually utility, at least one or more to pay for, and you've got more city regulations and that sort of thing. So start off easy. Take smaller steps before you jump. That would be my suggestion. And even duplexes or fourplexes in this day and age, houses are generally producing about as good a return on investment as a duplex or triplex are. And when that's the case, I'd rather have a house because it's simpler. Usually its appreciation is greater because it's driven by the owner-occupant market, not just by income. You know, commercial and multifam properties are worth what the income is. So it's primarily driven, its value is driven by how much the rents go up, whereas the owner-occupant demand is what drives up single-family homes. So they're simpler. It's also easier to get loans, and it's also easier to liquidate because you have the entire owner-occupant market to sell to, not just investors. So getting a group of houses in lieu of a small multifam, especially in these times, I think is a very wise approach that you should strongly consider before you go jumping in a lake that may be a little colder and deeper than you expect. John here says, wrote in, says, you seem to emphasize the rent ratio. What is this all about? Rent ratio is the monthly rent divided by the total cost of acquisition. So that means if you buy a raw property instead of one from a turnkey provider like Wilson Investment Properties, that you've got to include all of those things I talked about before the last break. You've got to include the debt service, the insurance, the utilities, all the surprises, all of those elements. And once you add all those together and then you divide that into the rent, then that's when you get the rent ratio. And generally, the rule of thumb is with a 20 or 25% down loan that you need to have at or greater 1% rent ratio in order for that property to cash flow over the long term. So, for example, if it's you pay $100,000 for a house, it needs to have at least $1,000 rent. If you pay $500,000 for a property, it's got to rent for $5,000. And if you're thinking about in those terms for something that's typically in the Bay Area, wow, $5,000 for a $500K property, that's pretty tough to get. That's right. That's why it's tough to cash flow here locally. So we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with some more questions, and we look forward to covering some more topics here on AM 1220 KDOW.
For more information on today's program, visit RE360Radio.com. That's RE360Radio.com. AM 1220 KDOW traffic.
We're brought to you by Garmin. Traffic flow still looks pretty good in San Francisco. North 101 out through Hospital Curve towards the eastbound Skyway. It does start to bunch up at the Central Freeway split, making the connection on 2 eastbound 80 and the lower deck of the Bay Bridge. That's about it, though. Leaving the downtown, South 101 is okay. The westbound Skyway off the upper deck of the Bay Bridge, no real complaints there. And just some minor slow traffic around the stoplight at the Palace of Fine Arts for the ride up onto Doyle Drive. Heading to the Golden Gate Bridge, it looks okay there for the most part. And the 280 extension is fine in both directions. Some very minor northbound slowing before the 6th Street exit. Hate traffic? Don't be a hater. Get a Garmin Nuvi with subscription-free HD digital traffic and avoid it with updates as often as every 30 seconds. Drive with Garmin. And for more traffic information, log on to sigalerts.com.
Many of today's money experts agree. Real estate investing is hot. Prices have never been lower. Money never cheaper. The opportunity never greater. But where can you find entry-level opportunities where the risk is low and the returns are high? Welcome to Dallas-Fort Worth. This rapidly developing region has quickly become one of the most popular in the U.S. More and more businesses are relocating to the Dallas-Fort Worth area to call it headquarters and home. This is one of the reasons the investment real estate market there is experiencing such an increase in demand. And for the wise investor, demand equals profits. Folks there live and work by live large, think big. The same slogan can be applied to how investors are thinking about prime Dallas-Fort Worth real estate. Find out more by requesting an informative 18-page report on residential real estate investing. Call Wilson Investment Properties today at 408-867-1867. That's 408-867-1867. Or go to TomWilsonProperties.com.
KDOW listeners, do you know someone planning to sell their home? Friends, family, coworkers, clients, perhaps yourself? If so, listen to this.
I'm Steve Armstrong, Associate Broker with Fireside Realty. The Bay Area real estate market is hot right now. In fact, almost everywhere it's a seller's market. Why list a house with a realtor at a 6% or even a 5% commission rate when my rate is just 4% and includes the selling agent's commission? Now, I'm not talking about some stripped down, put it on the MLS, you're on your own kind of deal. Not a chance. Full service and total representation backed by my 35 years experience. And I won't tie you down to a long-term listing agreement either. 30 days on the local multiple listing is all I need. You must know someone, clients, coworkers, friends, or family who can benefit by paying thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of dollars less to sell their house. If so, please pass along my email address. I thank you, and they'll thank you.
Email steve@firesiderealty.com. That's steve@firesiderealty.com.
DRE 00574996.
Santa Clara University's engineering graduate programs offer you the best of two worlds, the high-tech expertise of Silicon Valley and the Jesuit tradition of educating the whole person. Our instructors include many recognized experts from Silicon Valley companies, and they bring their state-of-the-art knowledge into the classroom, providing a unique learning environment tailored to the needs of working professionals. For more on our various educational options, please call 408-554-4313 or visit us online at www.scu.edu/engineering/graduate.
Geico says, let's make life simpler.
You need to buy something, but you don't want to make a mistake. So what do? Scour the web? Collect sales circulars? Ask your brother-in-law? How about this? When it comes to car insurance, Geico has a 97% customer satisfaction rating. I repeat, 97%. So make it simple. Just ask a friend who has Geico. Then click or call. You could make it 98%.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
For more information on today's program, visit RE360Radio.com. That's RE360Radio.com. Now, here's your host for Real Estate 360, Tom K. Wilson.
Welcome back. We're today discussing frequently asked questions by investors, and I'm glad to field them. And if you have one of your own that you would like to call in on, that's 1-800-516-1220. That's 1-800-516-1220. So the next question we're going to cover is, in Wilson Investment Properties, most of the properties that we find for investors, the best ones we can possibly find, are always at least a few years old, not brand new. And people ask me, well, wouldn't I rather have a brand new house if I can get it? Well, sometimes it's okay, but the problem with many brand new houses is that they are in developments that are in new areas that don't have the infrastructure in there yet. It has been that often they would be because a developer who initially said, no way I'm going to sell to an investor, now needs to, and they open it up to investors as well. And the building cost is still higher than per foot than it is to buy an existing home. You're buying a home that's a little bit more remote and without some of the infrastructure. You've got a lot of homes in the area often that are still that are vacant, so you tend to attract folks that are trying to prey on that situation. And if there's several of those homes are getting sold to investors at once with and being turned into rentals, then you're competing with others in that immediate area for rent, and you may well not get the rent that was projected to get when you bought the property. I've heard that story over and over again. Now, if you have a property that's new, brand new, and it's in an infill area, which means it's an area that has a few lots that's in a development that was done some time ago, and there are not too many of them, and the cost is about the same and the numbers work, then go for it, for sure. But I wouldn't seek new ones, because usually you're going to have the problems that I just discussed. Next question. Again, if you have a question that you want to call in for, it's 1-800-516-1220. Mary says, what should I be cautious about when shopping for properties on the internet? Well, there's several things. First of all, about 3/4 of all the internet websites selling properties are not really direct sellers. They are referral services. And you want to deal with an organization that's actually doing the work and understands that business very well. And you also want to look for all of the information. If you see a site that's holding back a lot of information, just trying to get you probably to call in so then they can go sell you, be a little more cautious. In other words, some of the things you see on the site without having to go through a lot of work to get it should be the year built. That's often missing. Guess why? If that's missing, it probably means it's an older property. How many square feet is it? What's the construction? Is it brick? Is it, if it's in an area like the South where most homes built in the last 25 years are brick, you want a brick home. What condition is it in? Does it have roof problems? Does it have foundation problems? Do you have a lot of photos? Is it just showing 2 or 3 pictures of the pretty areas, or are they letting you see what the side yards, the backyard, the street looks like, the neighbors, all of those things? Those are important. Excuse me. And what's the what is the in addition to having many different kinds of photos, is it conforming to the neighborhood? Is it something that is not typical in that neighborhood? If so, it's going to be harder to rent, or it's going to be harder to sell when it's time to sell. So you got to be very very careful about those kinds of items. So when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about buying a property out of state and some more items that I get asked very, very often. So this is AM 1220 KDOW, and we'll be back with you in just a couple of minutes with some more great questions.
For more information on today's program, visit RE360Radio.com. That's RE360Radio.com. AM 1220 KDOW traffic.
We're brought to you by Garmin, the East Shore Freeway in Berkeley, offering some slow traffic in both directions between the Maze and University Avenue. East 24, some minor slowing at Highway 13 out through the Caldecott Tunnel, but from there, it moves pretty well up through Orinda into Lafayette. The 680 corridor is problem-free between Walnut Creek and Danville. And eastbound 580 is okay up into Livermore. It does slow down, though, further out towards the Altamont Pass. It's a crash on the other side of the pass near Grant Line Road, and that's why it's slow from about North Flynn. No problems on 580 Oakland into San Leandro. South 880 just a little slow down past High. Hate traffic? Don't be a hater. Get a Garmin Nuvie with subscription-free HD digital traffic and avoid it with updates as often as every 30 seconds. Drive with Garmin. And for more traffic, it's sigalerts.com.
Do you snore? Do you share a room with someone whose snoring keeps you up at night? Finally, for the first time ever, you can put a stop to snoring instantly with SnoreBreak. SnoreBreak is not a nose or mouthpiece, it's not a drug, and it's not a procedure. SnoreBreak is a patented liner that goes beneath the pillowcase and reduces snoring from the very first night. The secret is a fusion of natural extracts that dramatically improve breathing. SnoreBreak is comfortable, easy, and virtually undetectable. Snorebreak works, and right now we're sending risk-free trials to listeners in your area. Just call 1-800-475-5481. Don't suffer one more sleepless night. Whether it's light snoring or heavy snoring, Snorebreak will help put a stop to it the very first night. Hurry and take part in this limited time risk-free trial. Just call 1-800-475-5481. That's 1-800-475-5481. Call 1-800-475-5481.
For more information on today's program, visit RE360Radio.com. That's RE360Radio.com. Now, here's your host for Real Estate 360, Tom K. Wilson.
Welcome back to Real Estate 360. We're covering today many frequently asked questions by investors, and we're glad to do that. If you have a question of your own, call in on 1-800-516-1220. So, another question I frequently get is, what are the risks of buying out of state? I'm a little nervous about doing that. Now, there was a point in my investment career where that was a concern for me as well. The traditional thought was, if you're going to buy real estate, make sure it's something you can drive to. So when I studied the country, about 14 years ago, when I first considered going out of state, and I found for myself that Dallas-Fort Worth was the area that I felt had the best return and met my goals the best. I then interviewed many people who were successful investors, asked them where they were investing and why, and that's how I went about my research and found an area that was just a very, very good return. But I was nervous about going out of state, so I asked, one of my mentors said, well, Tom, if you ever bought stock? And I said, well, sure. And they said, well, when you bought the stock, did you buy it because you thought the best return on investment, or did you buy it because you could drive to the corporate headquarters and kick the brick and mortar and interview management? So I said, I get it, took the wind out of my sails, and I think there's no difference in real estate. Now, when you buy stock, you want to buy it in a company that's well managed. So the same thing with rental properties. Indeed, if it's out of the area, you want to have a very good property manager, and that's indeed very, very important. So you should and you should not buy a property unless you have it managed well. And I think even that's true if you accumulate any number of properties locally. You've heard me say before many times that it's better to be an investor than a landlord. There's some value up front in learning how to manage property so that you can have a better appreciation for what a property manager addresses and deals with. But I think, in general, in the long run, you want to leave that to those experts, and you want to focus on what you want to do best, and that is investing. So I would say invest where the investment's best, get a good property manager, and let's face it, most places in this country, if you really got to go, you can get there in a reasonable length of time. And, I think periodically it's not a bad idea to go visit, but if you have a good team in that area and you have a good property manager, you don't need to be visiting that property very often. So that's how I feel about investing out of state. Now, indeed, you want to have a good property manager. What are the factors you look for? Well, you look for referrals, and you don't just ask the property manager, of course, for some referrals. You can do that. But, of course, they're going to give you ones that give them a good report. So what you want to do is go on the Internet. You want to call up folks that are maybe investors in that area who are using that property manager, and with a little bit extra work, you can find out how they've been performing. And that's probably, once you've chosen the metro and once you've chosen the product, that's probably your next biggest variable is what that property manager performance is. So don't cut that short. Make sure you do your due diligence on choosing that best property manager. How about buying from a turnkey provider versus buying a raw product? Well, certainly many people buy the raw product and have it fixed up. You can certainly do that. As though I mentioned a little bit early in the program, the things to be concerned about are that usually the costs are much greater and the time to get it rented is much longer than most people recognize. So what's the advantage when you buy from a turnkey provider? What is that doing for you? And we're talking about a direct source, not just a referral source. So what you're doing is to get a provider who's an expert in that region and knows the neighborhoods, knows how to select properties so that they reduce your risk. That's a large part of what you're getting. You're getting a significantly reduced risk because if it's a good provider, then they are sifting through all the properties that might be available and filtering that down and getting ones that are optimized for the intended goal, which is usually the best cash-on-cash return and the minimum risk. You don't want to get a property that's too inexpensive because then it may look good on paper, but by the time you deal with the turnover and the collections problems and the repairs and make-readies by a bad tenant, you would have been much better off getting a really good property. You don't want to get one too expensive because then it's very hard to establish your 1% rent ratio rule. Remember, that means that you want to be able to get at least 1% per month of the value of the property with a 20 or 25% down loan in order to get a good, consistent cash flow over the long term. So if it gets too expensive, it's hard to establish and maintain that 1% rule. And it's also, you're getting, if let's say you happen to get a property that indeed does have the 1% rent ratio, but it's a high rent. Let's say it's a $200,000 property and it's getting $2,000 rent, which is pretty tough, but you can sometimes get it in certain areas on the surface. Well, it's a pretty small percentage of the market in most regions where rental income property works well. And if you have a very small percentage of the market that can afford that, then when it turns over, it may be waiting a while before you get that rented. So that's so there in every metro there's a sweet spot where you don't want to go too low, don't want to get too high, and stay within that range. And your turnkey provider, if they're good, they will know what that range is. They will have done the filtering and selecting so that you greatly reduce your risk in buying a property from them. Let's face it, if I were going to start buying in a new metro, even though I've had a lot of experience and bought and sold about 2,000 units over the past couple of decades, I would not consider doing that unless I found an expert in that area that knew that region very, very well. So we are going to cover a couple more questions here when we get back. And again, if you want to call in with a question, it's 1-800-516-1220. And we're AM 1220 KDOW. And we'll be back with some more in just a couple moments.
For more information on today's program, visit RE360Radio.com. That's RE360Radio.com. AM 1220 KDOW traffic.
We're brought to you by Garmin. South Bay is in pretty good shape so far. South 101, some slowing between Willow and Rengstorff, and still dealing with this South 85 accident. That's why it's extra slow there from the Central Expressway, the accident closer to Fremont Avenue, and that's got at least the right lane blocked, but they are into final clearing stages. Once south of the accident, it is A-OK heading down into Cupertino and Saratoga. South 280 Los Altos in fine shape, and it stays that way into Cupertino. South 101, just a little slow, Lawrence Expressway to Oakland Road. And 680 Sunol Grade is light, just some slowing at Durham. Hate traffic? Don't be a hater. Get a Garmin Nuvie with subscription-free HD digital traffic and avoid it with updates as often as every 30 seconds. Drive with Garmin. And for more traffic information, log on to sigalerts.com.
author Devin Olten on executive level mentality.
Executive level mentality speaks to challenging folks to change the way they see themselves, see the world in which they live, and also see a better opportunity being created by changing the currents of thoughts.
Devin Olten has combined his 20 years of leadership experience into an easy-to-read motivational book, Executive Level Mentality. Purchase your copy of Executive Level Mentality at devinolten.com. That's devinolten.com.
What are they going to do in Sacramento to get us out of our budget problems and keep our courts open to all? Once again, we go to a trusted source for the latest information, Assemblymember Bob Wykowski. This week's guest on Champions of Justice. Tom Girardi and Howard Miller ask him the tough questions for an hour. Wait till you hear the answers. Tune in Champions of Justice Saturday night at 5 and Sunday night at 8 here on AM 1220 KDOW.
It's a fact. One of the first things people see when they look at you is your smile. Just as you would invest in a good stock or bond, you should invest in your smile and dental health. Call the dental office of Dr. Shirley Bien today and make an appointment for a complete dental consultation. If you suffer from gum disease, including swollen, sore gums, or gums that bleed easily, your overall health may be at risk. Take this information and invest wisely. Call Dr. Shirley Bien at 510-790-8800 and make an appointment. That's 510-790-8800. 510-790-8800.
You're a smart investor, steady and consistent. That's how you roll. Sure, you've thought about the rewards of real estate investing, but California is a bit too pricey to give the best returns. Well, what if I told you about a turnkey real estate investment opportunity where all the hard work of locating, buying, renovating is done for you? Wilson Investment Properties has a list of highly selected, fully renovated, and occupied by screened, high-quality tenants. Wilson Investment Properties' goal is to offer you the highest quality, highest cash flow, turnkey investment properties in the most stable, fastest-growing rental markets in the nation. Tom Wilson and his team has experience with over $100 million in investment real estate, 1,800 units and over 300 single-family investment homes. Discover how you can succeed in real estate investing. Secure your free 18-page report by calling Wilson Investment Properties, 408-867-1867, 408-867-1867, or log on to TomWilsonProperties.com.
For more information on today's program, visit RE360Radio.com. That's RE360Radio.com. Now, here's your host for Real Estate 360, Tom K. Wilson.
Welcome back to Real Estate 360. And we're talking about the frequently asked questions by investors, both new and experienced, that I get all the time, to share that information with you. We were talking about the advantages of buying from a turnkey provider versus buying it yourself, with certainly the risk of reducing the risk of where to buy and what kind of product to buy. And there's also the cash factor. Because it takes a lot more cash out of your pocket to do it yourself than it does to buy from turnkey, that cash, extra cash that you pulled out doing the rehab and the holding costs and so forth, could instead have gone into buying another property. So that way you are able to leverage and build up your assets at a much faster rate than you would otherwise. Let's go to, I think we have time for about one more question. What kinds of, what are the factors I should look for in getting the best metro to invest in? Well, certainly you want to have the high rent ratio. You want to have a broad-based economy. I